Welcome to today's deep dive. Before we jump into anything, I want to start off right away by sending a warm, divine blessing your way for your day and really for your entire week ahead.
Yes, absolutely.
May you find peace, clarity, and strength in whatever you are facing right now. We are just so glad you're here with us.
So glad.
Because today, our mission is to explore, well, it's one of the most famous narratives in history, the parting of the Red Sea in Exodus 14.
Right, but I think it's important to say up front, we are completely bypassing the standard Sunday school version of this event today.
Oh, but completely.
Because when you strip away those cultural assumptions you grew up with and you look directly at the ancient context, this text reveals this incredibly intense study of tactical military blunders, the raw psychology of a traumatized people, and even a profound linguistic battle over authority.
Yeah, and to do that, we are pulling from the detailed scholarly footnotes of two really highly respected texts, the Holman Study Bible and the NAA.
The Nova Almeida Actualizada, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Both of these are heavily footnoted, academically rigorous translations. They focus a lot on archaeological context and the original Hebrew phrasing. And just as a quick reminder to you listening, we're not taking any sides or endorsing specific theological viewpoints here.
Right, we're just impartially reporting on the historical and linguistic analysis that's provided in these specific source material.
Exactly. And what those notes immediately highlight is just how bizarre the beginning of this narrative is from a strategic standpoint.
Oh, it makes absolutely zero sense to a military commander. I mean, God doesn't instruct them to take the most direct trade route out of Egyptian territory.
Right.
Nor does he tell them to, scatter into the deep wilderness to avoid detection. Instead, he gives them these incredibly specific, seemingly suicidal coordinates for where to set up their camp.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yes.
Because those coordinates are the trap.
Yes.
The text specifies they are to camp at Pi-Hahiroth, which translates to the mouth of the canal, and they're supposed to be positioned between Migdol, meaning a watchtower, and a place called Baal-Zephon.
And that last location, Baal-Zephon, that is a critical piece of the puzzle that I think modern readers usually just skim right over.
Oh, totally. Just sounds like another town name.
Exactly, but Baal-Zephon was not just a geographic marker. It incorporated the name of a major Canaanite deity.
Wow.
Yeah, this specific god was worshipped as the Lord of the North. He was heavily venerated by sailors and mariners as a god who controlled the sea and the storms.
So consider the optics of this positioning for a second. The Israelites are squeezed between an Egyptian military watchtower,
Yep.
a geographic bottleneck at the mouth of a canal, and a shrine dedicated to a pagan god of the sea.
With their backs literally right up against the water.
I was looking at that layout, and to any outside observer, especially Pharaoh's scouts, this just looked like a colossal navigational error.
It looks like they have no idea what they're doing.
Right. The text even explicitly notes that Pharaoh is watching this movement and concluding that the Israelites are wandering aimlessly, completely boxed in by the wilderness.
Because he sees a glaring vulnerability. And you have to remember, Pharaoh is looking at this through the lens of an empire that has just suffered a catastrophic economic collapse.
The plagues.
Exactly. The previous chapters detail these plagues, which completely decimated Egypt's agriculture, their livestock, their infrastructure.
And their religious elite, too. The magicians have been thoroughly humiliated by Moses.
Right, but there was one pillar of Egyptian supremacy that remained entirely untouched up to this point.
The military.
The military. The army had just been sitting out the plagues. They hadn't engaged at all.
And suddenly, Pharaoh realizes his entire enslaved workforce, which is the economic engine of his empire, is literally walking away.
And they appear to have blindly wandered into a geographic dead end.
So the response is just immediate and overwhelming. In the ancient Near East, the Egyptian army was the undisputed superpower.
Heavily reliant on chariot warfare.
Right. So when Pharaoh decides to reclaim his property, he doesn't just send, border patrols or a small police force. He mobilizes the ancient equivalent of a fully armored, highly prestigious tank division.
That's such a good analogy, because I was reading the numbers on this mobilization, and 600 chosen chariots.
Elite chariots.
Elite, plus the entire reserve force of all other chariots in Egypt. I mean, that seems like massive overkill for a group of fleeing, unarmed civilians on foot.
It really does. Why would Pharaoh mobilize to that extreme?
It comes down to psychological warfare and a deeply bruised imperial ego.
Ah, that makes sense.
Pharaoh isn't just trying to round up workers. He is trying to forcefully reassert his dominance on the world stage after being completely humiliated by the plagues.
Yeah, he needs to win.
A big win. And these chariots were terrifying machines. They were iron-fitted, often carrying a driver and an archer or a spearman. They were designed to break enemy lines through sheer speed and shock and awe tactics.
So sending the entire arsenal was a statement.
A massive statement. It was meant to induce absolute paralyzing terror in the Israelites.
Which it did. It is a completely asymmetrical conflict. You have thousands of families, livestock, pedestrians trapped on a shoreline, and over the horizon comes the thunder of thousands of horses and war machines.
What's fascinating here is how the biblical authors capture that sudden, visceral terror using a brilliant shift in narrative perspective.
Tell me about that.
Well, if you look at verses 5 through 9, the text reads almost like a historical ledger. It gives us this panoramic, high-level view of the Egyptian military machine mobilizing.
Detailing the horses and the chariots.
Right, the horsemen giving chase. But in verse 10, the camera angle violently drops to the ground.
Oh, because the text uses the phrase, "and behold."
Exactly. That phrase acts as a cinematic cut. And behold, the Egyptians were marching after them.
Wow.
It instantly yanks the reader out of that grand strategic overview and places them directly behind the eyes of the trapped Israelites. Suddenly, the Egyptian army is no longer a strategic concept on a map.
It is an immediate, deafening, deadly threat right in front of them.
The psychological whiplash of that moment is profound.
And that whiplash completely shatters their current state of mind. The study notes point at a really sharp contrast here.
Yeah.
Earlier in the Exodus narrative, the text says the Israelites marched out with a high hand.
Which is a Hebrew idiom.
Right, meaning they left with boldness,
Mm-hmm.
victorious defiance, joy. But the second they see the chariots, that boldness just completely evaporates.
It's gone.
Gone. And they turn on Moses with this incredibly dark, biting sarcasm. They ask him, "Were there no graves in Egypt? Is that why you brought us out here to die in the desert?"
And that specific insult carries so much historical weight. Egypt was a culture fundamentally obsessed with death, the afterlife, and monumental tombs.
The pyramids.
Exactly. For generations, the Israelites had been the forced laborers building those very monuments to death. So asking if there was a shortage of graves in Egypt isn't just a sarcastic quip.
Right.
It is a profound trauma response.
They actually take it a step further, too. They start actively rewriting their own history.
Oh, yeah.
They claim to Moses, "Didn't we tell you in Egypt to leave us alone so we could serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve them than to die here."
Which is wild, but it reveals the deeply ingrained psychology of enslavement.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenon we actually see in modern psychology regarding institutionalization. You can physically remove a person from a traumatic, captive environment, but changing how they think takes significantly longer.
Because faced with the terrifying uncertainty of freedom and immediate mortal danger, their minds immediately romanticize the past.
They suddenly prefer the miserable, crushing, but predictable certainty of slavery over the terrifying responsibility of standing against an empire.
The stress of the crowd is reaching an absolute boiling point at this moment. And Moses steps up to give this grand, calming speech.
He tries anyway.
Right, he tells them, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the Lord's salvation." Now, I want to pause on that word salvation for a second.
Yeah, that's a key word here.
Because in modern contexts, we almost exclusively use that word to describe a spiritual rescue or a state of grace. But what did that word actually mean to a group of ancient people staring down a chariot charge?
Well, in the original Hebrew, the word Moses uses is yasha. And the Study Bible footnotes heavily emphasize that yasha is deeply rooted in a military context.
So it's not spiritual.
Not here. Moses is not offering them a metaphorical or purely spiritual comfort. He is promising a definitive, violent, and absolute military victory.
Wow.
He is telling them that God is going to physically fight this battle and annihilate the threat in front of them.
But then, right after Moses delivers this incredibly stoic, defensive speech, God actually interrupts him.
I love this part.
The text shows God looking at Moses and essentially asking, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to march."
It completely upends Moses' posture. Moses is trying to be the calming, defensive presence, telling everyone to stand still and wait for rescue.
Just hold the line.
Right. But God counters that by demanding action. He tells them, this is not the time for standing still or crying out in prayer. It is time to move forward into an impossible situation.
Here's where it gets really interesting logistically. Because God doesn't just tell them to blindly march into the water while exposing their rear guard to the chariots.
No, that would be a slaughter.
Exactly. The text introduces a massive supernatural buffer. The angel of God, along with the pillar of cloud that had been leading the camp, shifts position entirely.
It moves to the rear.
Yes, standing directly between the Egyptian vanguard and the Israelite civilians.
And the tactical brilliance of that maneuver really cannot be overstated. That pillar of cloud operates as a dual-purpose phenomenon that completely dictates the terms of engagement for the entire night.
How so?
Well, on the Egyptian side, the cloud manifests as a pitch-black wall of unnatural darkness. It completely blinds Pharaoh's forces, stalling their advance and creating total geographical confusion. They are paralyzed.
But I was thinking about the logistics for the Israelites. You are trying to organize, pack up, and move hundreds of thousands of terrified people, plus livestock, into a dry seabed in the middle of the night.
Right.
You cannot do that in the dark.
Exactly the point the footnotes make. For the Israelites, that same cloud is projecting massive illumination.
Oh, wow.
It acts as a colossal spotlight, giving them the daylight they need to safely navigate the descent into the sea. So you have simultaneous paralyzing darkness for the oppressor and guiding light for the oppressed.
Which prevents any skirmishes or contact between the two camps all night long.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, Moses stretches his hand over the sea, and a strong east wind drives the water back. But the text is very deliberate with its wording here.
Very deliberate.
It doesn't describe a shallow sandbar or a simple receding tide. It explicitly states the waters became a wall to them on their right and on their left.
And the use of the word wall highlights a very specific military defense mechanism. If you are marching an army, or in this case, an entire nation through a narrow corridor, your greatest vulnerability is a flanking attack from the sides.
Right, getting hit from the left or right.
Exactly. By establishing walls of water on both the right and the left, the environment itself becomes an anti-flanking mechanism. The only possible way the Egyptian chariots can pursue is by funneling straight in behind them, directly into the narrow corridor that God controls.
Which sets the stage for the climax. And the timing of this is crucial. The historical notes indicate that the collapse of the Egyptian army occurs during the morning watch.
Yes, the morning watch. Ancient military nights were divided into distinct watches, and the morning watch typically fell between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m.
That sounds miserable.
It is. Biologically and psychologically, this is the most grueling part of the night. It is the darkest, coldest time when human exhaustion is at its absolute peak.
And during that specific window of maximum exhaustion, God looks down through the pillar of fire and cloud and throws the Egyptian camp into total chaos.
Complete panic.
The text says he jams the wheels of their chariots. Some translations note that he caused them to swerve heavily or drive with extreme difficulty.
Because the seabed, which had been perfectly dry for the Israelites, suddenly becomes a treacherous mud trap for the heavy Egyptian iron.
The irony there is just striking. The chariots, which were the ultimate symbol of Pharaoh's invincibility and the source of the Israelites' terror.
They instantly become a massive liability. You have these elite war machines crashing into each other in pitch darkness, completely bogged down.
And it is in that moment of helpless chaos that the Egyptian soldiers finally recognize the reality of what they are fighting.
Yes.
They actually shout, "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt."
They realize they are entirely outmatched, but the realization comes too late. As daybreak arrives, Moses again stretches his hand out over the sea, and the walls of water collapse.
And the text is completely uncompromising about the outcome here.
Completely.
The entire armored division, the chosen chariots, the captains, all of it is swept away. Not a single soldier survives.
If we connect this to the bigger picture the scholarly notes provide, this entire sequence is the culmination of a cosmic dispute over whose hand possesses true authority.
Right.
From the very beginning of the Exodus story, Pharaoh believed his hand was supreme. He believed his grip on the Israelite people was unbreakable and his military reach was absolute.
But the closing verses of chapter 14 summarize the true reality. It explicitly says that when Israel saw the great hand of the Lord, referencing the overwhelming power used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him.
It is a profound textual contrast of power, and it ties deeply into the ancient Hebrew theology of glory.
I found this part so interesting.
Yeah, earlier in the chapter, God repeatedly states that he will be glorified through Pharaoh and his army. The Hebrew root word for glory is kavod. Right, which literally means to be heavy, or to possess profound weight and substance.
I found that linguistic connection absolutely fascinating when looking through the source material.
It changes how you read the whole book. For chapters, Pharaoh has been defined by his hardened heart. In Hebrew, that hardening is also described using words related to heaviness.
Oh, wow.
Pharaoh was stubbornly heavy in his pride, his arrogance, and his refusal to yield. So God's declaration that he will be glorified is essentially a
A
challenge.
showdown.
Exactly. You think your authority carries weight? I will demonstrate what true divine weight actually is.
And the literal crushing weight of the sea collapsing on the Egyptian army is the physical manifestation of God's heavy glory prevailing over Pharaoh's heavy, stubborn heart.
Yes.
That demonstration of true weight completely transforms the Israelite people. This deep dive shows us that Exodus 14 is documenting a massive psychological shift.
It really is.
They begin the chapter utterly paralyzed, romanticizing their own enslavement out of sheer terror. But by the end of the chapter, that paralyzing fear of an earthly empire is entirely replaced by a reverent fear and trust in a higher power.
Their entire framework of allegiance is dismantled and rebuilt in a single night. And the text cements this new reality by bestowing a very specific title on Moses at the end of the narrative.
Right.
It calls him the servant of the Lord.
And that title is the ultimate reframing of their identity. Up until this point, their only understanding of existence was being a servant of Egypt.
The servant of Pharaoh.
Right. So to hear their leader called a servant of the Lord provides an empowering alternative. It shifts their identity from being oppressed, disposable labor for a tyrant, to being the protected, chosen people of the power that controls the seas.
It changes everything for them.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? The core takeaway from diving into these scholarly notes is that the parting of the Red Sea isn't just an ancient tale of a geographic escape route.
No, not at all.
It is a profound study of the journey from terrifying physical enslavement to trusting a higher power, a power that orchestrates everything right down to the jamming of an enemy's chariot wheels in the darkest part of the night.
Yeah.
It is about learning how to stand firm, but also knowing when to stop looking back at what enslaved you and simply march forward.
The psychology of the Israelites in this text is incredibly relevant today. We explored how rapidly their memories were rewritten by immediate fear, how the mere sight of Pharaoh's chariots made them yearn for the miserable yet familiar safety of slavery.
It's a human reaction.
It is. So I would challenge you to consider, what are the chariots in your own life right now? What sudden fears, anxieties, or overwhelming pressures are causing you to retreat? What is making you forget the bold decisions you have already made to move forward and be free?
That is a deeply clarifying question to carry with you this week. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through the text. We love doing these deep dives with you, moving past the surface to uncover the history, the strategy, and the hidden wisdom in these incredible sources. We have to say goodbye for now, but always remember that God blesses all the listeners. Have an amazing, courageous week.